Um, okay, so this is a really interesting assignment because what we're doing is we're starting to work with words or typography, you could say, in the design sense of it. You know, taking a word and using typeface to try to communicate a meaning. But essentially, I have an example here. I actually kept this example in my digital files for forever. I think you could still find it on the internet. That's where I originally found it. And I've used it in typography classes to sort of kind of ex eh, contextualize how typography or typefaces or fonts uh, can really influence the meaning of a word. You know, and that's the power of what designers have. So there are two words here. There's love and there's hate. And there's four different variations using four different typefaces. Now, what typography really is just shape, isn't it? Shape, you could say shape and line. And so depending upon how you work with the shape and line, it can convey different types of meanings. So let's just start with the love. If you take a look at this row of this column of four words, love, in different typefaces, just look at them for a minute and in your mind, you know, pick one of them, one, two, three, or four, that you think is most closely associated in terms of the sort of effect of the typography with what you think of as love. So when I've asked this in, in person with students, invariably everybody picks this one right here. You may have picked this one, that this typeface, it's this typeface. You can see if you look at it, it's very smooth. The lines kind of very elegant. Kind of just has this very sort of effortless, like a handwriting, but a very smooth, controlled handwriting. It's kind of a gentle quality too, with the kind of rounded shapes, and that sort of associates us with the our understanding of love, like the kind of positive feeling of love, right? And then if we go through the other ones, this one here, um, sometimes people will go with this one as the next one, maybe, potentially, but this one is a little bit more, it's kind of like medieval or kind of, it has kind of almost like a biblical quality. This one's very neutral. It's like maybe Arial, the font called Arial or something, you know, like just a real simple modern font that's you could say is fairly neutral. Doesn't have a lot of personality other than just being easy to read and kind of a professional font. So this last one is really kind of crazy looking, isn't it? It's like kind of very kind of splattery. It almost looks like something from a crime scene. It has kind of like a out of control quality to it, with the kind of loose shapes, painter sort of style. And so this one is actually a very, kind of, if you say, what does this kind of, like I sometimes ask students, like, what kind of love does this convey? You know, the kind of quality of love, and people say, oh, it's like psychotic love or kind of stalkery or really, unpleasant, you know? So by which to say, the words themselves have a meaning, so we have an association with the word love. But then as designers, we can temper that. We can reinforce it. In this case, you can see this is reinforced. We can also contrast it, so we kind of build another meaning into it. So now we have love, but we have a, very different type of love, you know? So it's like you can kind of play with how you work with typefaces, to enhance the existing meaning or to enhance it in kind of a different way. And then if we look at hate, same thing, you can pick out which one of these do you think is the most reinforcing to the idea of hate, like makes it seem the most hate. And most of the time students will pick this one, maybe this one next, because if this is kind of sharp and pointy, it has kind of an edge to it. This one, of course, is just the most, maybe. And then, this is the most neutral, and then this is one that in a way counteracts it, sort of softens it in some way, or gives it a slightly different meaning or a twist to, just 100% hate. You know what I mean? Because it softens, because the curves really soften it up and make it seem sort of gentler. Okay, so I just want to say that, but the thing I also want to keep just you to keep in mind that really typography is just based on shapes, sort of square shapes, geometric shapes, organic shapes, pointed, sharp, thin, thick. Those all can help to convey the meaning. I also want to just touch into the assignment itself. Just kind of touch into on the instructions. So in addition to typography, you're going to be using color to convey the meaning of, whatever phrase or sentence you chose. And everybody can interpret it how they like. We'll sort of look at that, and maybe see if there's ways we can sort of push that mood if we need to. But color and typography are the two ways that we're working with the sentence that you've chosen. There's not a lot else, I guess, in terms of restrictions other than I think that a maximum of 3 typefaces, styles of type. And I think that in terms of color, you can work with achromatic, which is really just a very neutral color scheme. Achromatic is like maybe grayscale, like just grays, like blacks, grays, and white colors. Monochromatic means just one single hue, like you could use all green or all red, and then either warm or cool. Now, I just want to say that our assignment itself, the example, I haven't taught this class for a while, so some things have changed since I've last looked at it, and I'll just say that this example is actually warm and cool. So unfortunately, I'm going to drop a note to course development and see if that maybe it's something they can look at, because it isn't really following. Everything else follows the directions, but this in particular doesn't. So just keep that in mind. Okay. All right. Okay, so one of the things I like about this assignment is just the quotes themselves. I think that it's just, words are very powerful, and then to combine them in design, I think is really just a really fun exercise. So let's see, Dulce, to be soft is to be powerful. Yeah, well, I agree with that. Um, and I think you've done a really nice job here at choosing typefaces that really emphasize the words. So soft is very soft, and then I like the way that you've created a little bit of a shadow behind it that increases the softness. And then you have this text in a much more powerful font, which, the powerful because it's a little bit more geometric and it has a, a bigger footprint, so it takes up more space. And it looks like you're working with warm colors. And you also have this text, which is, kind of, you could say, in a way, filler text isn't exactly what I'm looking for, but it's the more neutral text, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be designed in the same way as these words are all about. So I think you made a nice choice here to make them very simple. Yeah, so it looks good. So I only have, just a few suggestions here of how you could work on this a little bit more. And one thing I thought of is possibly maybe filling the space a little bit more with these words. You've got a lot of empty space right now, which makes it feel like, a sense of being ungrounded. What you could also try too is putting in a colored background behind this instead of white, like so you could keep it maybe like a soft. Actually, let me just pull into the software. Hold on. You could put in a very light color if you like, a light kind of warm color, or you could even try. I don't know. I'd probably go with light. I was going to say a dark color for contrast, but then I think this text might get lost. But you could just experiment with filling in the background with a color, and that will also help kind of fill the space. Maybe that would be a way to work with that. Yeah, the only other thing you might want to experiment with is with powerful. Uh, you might want to, let me just grab my eyedropper tool here and get in the color picker here. Oh, I don't know. That's pretty saturated. I was going to say maybe make it a little more saturated so that saturated colors have more power generally. Darker colors, I would say, or saturated colors. So you could experiment with that. It's pretty, you can see here's your color and here's the saturated color. That might give it a little bit more oomph, you know. It's like when you're trying to create contrasts, like soft versus powerful, you can really, push those, exaggerate those properties of shape and color like you're doing. You're already doing that. This is softer and this is more powerful in terms of color and style of text. Okay, yeah, you're really on the right track. So just, keep experimenting a little bit more. Okay, Katrina, yeah, analogous colors that, you can choose really any color temperature with analogous. It's just, they're next to each other on the color wheel. But I like, your choice of warm colors because I agree, I think it gives it a nice warm color that really fits the um, the quotation. So yeah, and I like what you did here too with the text. It's kind of fun, and then fun is really a very kind of curvy, kind of a little bit, wild looking. I don't know if wild's the right word, but it kind of has a lot of creativity to it because it goes in different directions, maybe a little unexpected directions, to do the impossible, and then that's a little bit more of a heavier, more sort of controlled font, which I think looks great. So yeah, so I would maybe say similar things to what I said to Dulce, which is I would work with maybe a little bit more of the space, like maybe fill your design up a little bit more. Don't be afraid to get the design a little bit um, bigger in the space. And then with a background, sometimes even just adding a really, like you could add a very pale yellow background and fill the space just to kind of ground it, so that and then that also will tie in the color scheme, pale orange. You could experiment with that. Um, yeah, don't feel like it's always really interesting when people exaggerate sizes in text. So maybe impossible could be just really a lot bigger. Maybe fun could be a bit bigger. Maybe this could be even a little bit smaller, and you could, so that you really put the emphasis on fun and impossible. So you can kind of experiment with that. Um, but yeah, I think you're also really have made some good choices in here and are really expressing the qualities of the quotation with color and typography. Okay, Brittany, I really like what you did with the design here, the composition of this, where you've actually, really done some of the things that we've actually been working with in previous units. Or milestones, I should say. It's really easy, I think, once you start going with text to lose a little bit of, that kind of sense of working with the space. So it's always good to kind of keep thinking that typography, it is a little bit different in the way we often work with it in terms of designers, but in general, it's like the same kind of idea of working with the shapes and working. I like what you've done here with working with the edges here, like pulling it right down and kind of thinking about how to link things together. You've got these lines that are sort of pulled through, which is like tying it all together, and then also really commanding the space, like really making you know making sure that the positive space is really settled into the design so it has a sense of being grounded. So I think that looks really good. Um, and I think you've chosen to work with sort of like a very sort of like uh, the typeface. I don't know. It's sort of got like almost like a little bit 1970s. Is that, am I on the right track there? It has that kind of bubbly, sort of rounded quality, and it has a really big, what we say in design, like a footprint, big footprint, so it kind of fills the space. So it definitely has like a sense of, really, again, commanding the space. And the color is, a very cheery, bright color, which seems to really make sense with the idea of jokes and punchlines because it has this very kind of like, you know, upbeat quality, which is true of a lot of the warm colors, especially I would say yellow. Um, and yeah, so the only thing I would say in your design to work with is I might try experimenting maybe with the contrast. Sometimes, like what's happening here is because yellow is such a light color, if you look at the value of it, like I'll show you what I mean here. I just like opened the color picker here in Photoshop just to kind of take a look at, so here is a yellow. Now, if we kind of just skim through the colors in here, you'll notice that most colors are actually in terms of value. Like if you try to take out the color itself, if you look at the value of the color, it's actually darker than yellow, if that makes sense, especially when we get into the cool colors here. And so yellow is like actually a lighter color, even when you have it really beautifully saturated like you do. So when you put it against white, it tends to get a little lost. So you can try experimenting to solve this. There's a few different ways to do it. One is you might try a darker background here, like maybe just a really neutral color, like a gray or something like that. You could try putting that behind there and see that'll probably make the letters stand out a little bit more in the shapes. Um, you could try that. Another thing you can do is work with, like if you notice anywhere there's a darker yellow here, like all of the ones in here, anywhere you make it a little darker will also stand out more. So you might experiment with that a little bit more, is just darkening the yellows. Especially like right here too, like you could just darken this a little bit more and then this could stay lighter, and that will make it stand out. So just experiment with that. Yellow is like is a color that the further especially if you study graphic design, is one of the colors that is known to be a little tricky with working with typography, because it makes the text a little harder to read. So, this class is not a typography class, so we're not really going too deep into that. But, just a trick to, if you want to keep the yellow, which I think was really nice and you should work with it, those are a few things you can do to make the text stand out a little bit more.